In this presentation, we're going to be looking at two new tools inside of Autodesk's Maya 2015 Extension 1. We're going to be checking out the Autodesk Color Management System as well as a new performance profiling tool. So Autodesk Color Management, also known as SendColor, is a shared technology component that's integrated into several Autodesk applications. It's going to help Maya artists preserve creative intent throughout lighting and rendering workflows by offering more accurate color reproduction in Maya's windows and editors, as well as frames rendered using Mental Ray. So let's go ahead and jump into our system preferences, and I'll walk you through the process of setting up the color management. So right out of the box, color management is going to provide you with a simple linear workflow. Studios can customize the system to closely match their color pipeline. It has the flexibility of working with OpenColor I/O. So if you have an OpenColor I/O pipeline established, all you have to do is load those OpenColor I/O config files into Maya to begin using them. So the way the color management works is through a series of color transforms. We start off by defining our input color space. In my example, most of my texture maps are based on sRGB, so that's the choice that I've made. At any given time, you can override the default at the file node level. So that means something like my background image, which is using a high dynamic range, I would switch over to a scene linear input type. So after you've defined your input color space, next you need to define your rendering color space. So this is really where Viewport 2.0 is going to be doing its rendering as well as the software rendering. This is going to be the rendering space that you've defined, and we have a list of choices. These are all linear choices, their difference being the primaries that they use and the gamut that they have. It's worth mentioning that we have full support for the Academy Color Encoding Systems ACEs. So we're going to, for my example, use Scene Linear Rec 709. So that's where all our rendering is happening. So the final step of the managed process is to get our viewer into a transform state that is appropriate to the look or the final output that we would expect, kind of the graded version of it. And for this example, we're just using a simple sRGB transform. As I mentioned previously, it's easily customizable. So if you want to add your own transforms, all you have to do is go to the drop-down list and say Add New. For this example, I'm going to add a transform that was saved out of Flame. Again, because Flame, Smoke, Luster, they all use the same SendColor technology, we can share grades and looks that have been developed in those tools inside of Maya and view them both in the viewport and the render view. So it's really pretty cool. So let's go ahead and just browse out to this guy. We'll jump over to my color lookup so we can work with 3D LUT. And for this example, I'm just going to grab a .ctf file that was made out of Flame. So this is using the photomap node in Flame to do some tone mapping, to take that linear color space and bring it into a viewable color space with a little bit of blue added to it in the process. So we'll call this something meaningful like blue, and we'll set the source color space to raw, and we'll go ahead and we'll save that out. So as soon as I save that, you saw my viewer switch to represent that new color space lookup. So at any given time, we can just pump the contrast on this guy. We can disable whether or not we're going to use the transform on our viewer and just look at our actual rendered space. So this is the scene linear space. And then when we turn the color transform back on for the view, we're now looking at it through that tone map that was developed inside of Flame. So this is really where it gets pretty interesting. The color management system's also integrated into our shader balls as well as our color picker. So to demo that, what we're going to do is we're just going to get a simple piece of geometry in here that's got the default Lambert shader on there. So it's a 50% gray shader on this piece of geometry here. So if we go over to our color swatches, obviously 50% gray doesn't really represent what we see in our scene view. So to get to have this 50% gray actually be consistent with what we're seeing in our color managed view, I'm going to turn on Show Color Managed Pots. As soon as I do that, you can see that 50% gray with the blue lookup is actually got a much cooler tone to it. And look at where the color slider is. So even with a value of 0.5, right, the color slider is way over here into the higher range. So the sliders are fully calibrated to work in this really nice color managed space, including the color picker. So if we do something like overblow this guy really to white, and we go into our color picker and I'm trying to match that ball to the blue on the leg, if I use my color picker to do this, it's going to show me the color in my viewer color space, but look at the RGB values. The actual color picker is picking in the scene linear color space, so they're very low values because we're working in float, and obviously the blue is a little bit higher. So as soon as we do that, you can see that we actually ended up picking a blue value, even though it was showing white in the viewer. So it's a very nice, elegant integration of color swatch management with the color picker, all working in a full managed environment. And it's worth mentioning that the render view, if we go ahead and launch a render here, is also using the same exact workflow. So if we go and we do a software render, this is using Mental Ray to render it, we're going to have a consistent color. So this means you have color safe handling across the images through your whole pipeline, whether you're using creative finishing tools, Nuke, Photoshop. It's going to allow color compatibility from start to end. And there's a full SDK, so third parties can implement this and support the Modeler color management system in their renders or plugins. So you can see we're using that. Let's just go to the sRGB lookup on this guy. And again, everything that we're doing is full float inside of Maya, both in the render views and the viewports. So that's just a quick introduction to the new color management inside of Maya 2015 Extension 1. Next, we're going to be looking at the profiling tool. So now we're going to be looking at the Performance Profiler, and this is a really great new tool. Technical directors are going to love it because it will let them evaluate their scene and figure out where the most time is being spent. It's also going to be great for tool developers because, again, that same ability to evaluate what's going on inside of Maya will give them insight into the performance of their tools and how they can use that and possibly find some speed benefits using the Performance Profiler to identify the slow areas in their evaluation. So the way it works is pretty straightforward. I've got a scene here that actually plays back really quite fast. It's totally fine. So what we're going to do is I'm going to break my file by doing something kind of silly to it. I'm going to do something that you normally wouldn't do, and that's using the Transfer Attributes tool to make a piece of geometry follow another piece of geometry. So Transfer Attributes isn't the fastest tool. It's very powerful, but it's not the fastest tool. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that to take this character's head. We're just going to duplicate that head. And obviously that's not going along for the ride. So what I want to do is I want to take my original vertex position and have it transferred onto my duplicated head using that Transfer Attributes tool. So we'll bring up the options for this. Vertex position's turned on, so we'll go ahead and hold apply. And you can see that it takes some time to do that. So we've now got a potential problem in my scene, and we're going to use that Performance Profiler to focus in on where that problem is and identify it to address it. So the Performance Profiler allows you to specify what you want to profile. So we don't really need to specify or look at any of the Bifrost or XGen stuff. I do want to see all my UI draws and pretty much the evaluation of the viewport draws, as well as all of the dependency graph draws. So I'm going to leave all that other stuff on. We'll set our buffer size up. That's pretty high. And as soon as I hit start, we'll just kind of zoom back here a little bit so we can see what's going on with this guy. As soon as I hit start, it's now recording what I'm doing. So if I move around, if I bring up the attribute editor, close the attribute editor down, select geometry, all that stuff is being recorded in the Performance Profiler. And if we hit play, obviously, the playback is going to be kind of slow now with that Transfer Attributes tool on there, but it'll clearly illustrate where the problem is in the scene. So now we hit stop on this. So if we look at this right off the bat, we'll kind of expand this out so it's a little bit bigger here. What we're seeing is, obviously, this is all the time where I didn't have the frame rate going. So, there's lots of little stuff in here happening, and a lot of it's happening, pretty quick, right? Like all these little QT draws and things like that. They're just hundreds, thousands of a millisecond. So all that stuff is, very, very fast. But if we zoom out, right, and we start to see those frames, so you can really clearly see the ticks of the frames there, that's where our slowdown is. So if we go up here to our evaluation area and we zoom in on this, well, there you can see that is what's taking the time. It's this guy right here is taking 1.29 seconds. Everything else is taking, hundreds of milliseconds, but that DG evaluation of the Transfer Attributes is really what's slow on my head blend shape. So by simply deleting that guy and playing it back, obviously our frame rate's going to go back to being really quick. If we go back into that Performance Profiler tool and start it up one more time, hit play, stop it, you can see that now the frames tick off and there's just nothing there. We can see what's the slowest thing in here, but it's not going to be that. It's not taking that long. It's milliseconds. So it's a great tool for giving you insight into what's going on in your scene and help you identify problems and fine-tune them and eliminate them. So that's just two examples of stuff that's new inside of Maya 2015 Extension 1. We saw the color management system and the new profiling tool. Thanks for checking it out.